Hi, I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Sophie, and we are here to help guide you to the why behind your wellness why.
Come join us on our journey.
Thank you for joining us again to continue our talk on metabolism. This is the podcast where we're going to answer your questions. Chelsea, do you want to take it away?
So we put on our Instagram a question box for you guys of what metabolism questions do you have? And I think a really good one to start with, because this kind of answers a lot of the questions, and then we can get into each of the different topics. But I think one of the first questions we should answer right off the bat is, can you change your metabolism, or can your metabolism change? They're like kind of the same question, but also kind of not. And the reason why I'm saying they're not really the same question is because I think, can you change your metabolism means like, are there things that we can do in our life to have an impact on our metabolism? And the answer is yes. And then, can your metabolism change? I think of as there's also things in life that maybe are a little bit out of your control that can also change your metabolism. So we'll talk about each of those things. So a couple of examples that we'll get into are things like dieting, chronic dieting, not eating enough can have an impact on your metabolism. Body composition, which we'll get into a lot, and a lot of this goes back to it, as we had already talked about, like muscle versus fat, which then in turn, so for example, if you're an athlete and then you're not an athlete anymore and you just completely like cut cold turkey, then like if your body composition changed, that might impact your metabolism. Timing of eating, so like when you're eating throughout the day. Things like Sophie said, medicine. The one question we got was specifically more about birth control, can potentially impact your metabolism. Age and other hormonal things such as like menopause, all of that type of stuff. So can your metabolism change? Yes. Can you do things to support your metabolism? Yes. So let's dive into some more specific examples. Where should we start, Sophie?
Let's start with something that Caitlin brought up, which Chelsea just said, how your metabolism can change, and being like a college athlete and then graduating and going to a desk job. Like, yes, that is going to affect your metabolism. It can in many ways, because your movement is probably slowing down. You might lose some muscle mass depending on what type of athlete you were, and things like that. But at the same time, you will probably also eat less, which can have an effect. But that's one of the things.
So I'm going to disagree with you on something you just said. Not because you said it wrong, but because of the you would assume what something you just said. So something that I saw very frequently when I was working at a health club as a dietitian were individuals in their mid-20s who came to me who had gained a lot of weight and felt like they weren't in the same position from a body composition standpoint, as well as from an exercise health standpoint, if that's the word you want to use, because they were an athlete and now they're not. And everything you said, I agree with the exception of one common thing that I saw was they were still eating very similarly to when they were an athlete. Because like, if you're an athlete all your life or most of your life and you're used to eating XYZ ways, it kind of goes back to that conversation of like, in our heads, yes, of course you would probably be eating differently because you're moving differently and all that type of stuff. But if you're not in tune with your hunger and fullness cues, you might still be eating the same exact way as when you were an athlete just because of habit. Like, how many times I can think about this, like when I was a high school athlete, for example, I would come home from school and grab a snack because I needed a fuel for the night because I was going to be at the dance studio for however many hours. And then, like, kind of that can transition into adulthood is okay, you've been sitting a desk job all day. You go home, you automatically go to the pantry because for all of your life, that's what you were used to. And I'm not saying like I'm a huge fan of snacking, so I'm not saying snacking is a bad thing, but I do think it comes back to like your intention, your hunger cues, why you're eating it, what you're eating, your portions, all of that type of stuff. So a lot of people struggle with that because they might have been an athlete and then they're not an athlete and their movement changes, but their nutrition doesn't change. Or they were never educated with nutrition. And so even when they were an athlete, they weren't eating the best way they could have been eating. And now you take that movement away, and now you're like really not eating appropriately for your body.
No, for sure. I feel like personally, though, me working out less recently, I'm eating less.
Yeah. I also think you're in tune with your body though, like hunger,
Yeah.
fullness cues and stuff like that, which is, I mean, like that's the goal, right? That's what we all want to get to a point where like we do recognize when our body needs fuel, we do eat when we're hungry, we are able to be mindful of all that type of stuff. So I think you're a really great example of like the goal you want to get to because you eat less because you're in tune with what your body needs and your hunger levels and stuff like that.
Okay, we got a great question on birth control and its relation to metabolism, which millions of women are on birth control pills, hormonal birth control pills, I should say. There are 40 different types, and every woman will respond differently to each one. Studies have shown that birth control can have an effect on like muscle mass and gaining lean mass, aka muscle, which could possibly over time lead to a slower metabolism. But I also don't think if you live an active lifestyle, it will have like a huge effect. Personally, I have been off of birth control for almost a year, and I have seen maybe a little bit more muscle definition, but it's not like I am the Hulk by any means. So I just want to put that in there. Specifically, though, there was some stuff on getting the birth control shot and how that can increase insulin levels and kind of increase the munchies, which, like, having higher levels of insulin can cause calories obtained from carbohydrates to be converted into fat cells, which probably, again, only if there's extra there. But for women who do have abnormal glucose metabolism are at higher risk of this side effect. But again, it only came down to about like 4.4 pounds a year added from a progestin only pill or that shot. It is actually kind of a myth for birth control to cause weight gain. But again, there are not enough studies on this. And being on certain birth controls, again, totally depends on each person and which ones can cause some water retention. But again, this isn't anything with your body composition, so therefore it wouldn't have an effect on your metabolism. Chelsea, do you have anything to add?
No, we haven't had our birth control topic yet. I have very strong opinions of this whole category. And I think what frustrates me with all of this, like you were basically saying, is there's just not enough research on it. So I think this is one like we would love to give you more information. And I do think there's more information on it. It's just really hard. And I think not even from a research standpoint, but I think what frustrates me more, like you're talking about, like if someone struggles with like higher glucose levels or understanding your glucose metabolism, and like doctors aren't even promoting getting your wellness checks done on a yearly basis. Like when I was in Chicago and I went to get my annual physical, the doctor was like, why are you getting blood work done? You just got it done last year. I don't know. I have very strong opinions on all of this, but basically the big takeaway is stay up to date with your information so you understand your body, especially if you're on any medication, including birth control.
Yes, Chelsea and I are eventually in the fall, winter, or spring are going to do a whole birth control series.
So stay tuned. So whoever asked this question, I know we got a couple of questions about like birth control, menopause. It kind of got me thinking about like how many people are interested in hormonal health, which is just getting me excited to get into all of that on here. Whoever was asking about birth control, I'm sorry it's not more black and white, but hopefully that gave you a little bit better understanding on some things. This leads really well into talking about age and metabolism. So we've all said it, we've all heard it. Oh, as I get older, my metabolism slows down. And I think a lot of people were shocked because a pretty big study came out in the past couple of years that was done with 64% females between the ages of 8 days, so like a newborn baby, and 95 years old from 29 countries around the world. And the results of that study were kind of shocking to a lot of people because the results showed that total and resting energy expenditure were pretty stable between the ages of 20 to 60, regardless of sex. And so this brings in a whole nother question of like, okay, all of our lives, and even from generations to generation here, as you get older, your metabolism starts slowing down. And we blame weight gain and fat gain on our slowing down metabolism because of our age. And now, like, can we do that anymore? And I think the big takeaway with this is it comes back to your lifestyle, and it comes back to a lot of things. Again, like medical history, genetics, all of that type of stuff do play a role. So I don't want to dismiss that. But if you dive into the study a little bit more in detail, it does bring the layer of lifestyle on, talking about adults who live an active lifestyle versus adults who do not live an active lifestyle, and bringing on what Sophie was saying before of the whole difference in our overall breakdown of body composition, muscle versus fat, the importance of strength training, keeping up with maintaining your muscle mass, building muscle, bone density, all of those types of things. Because if we really dive into it and think about it, and again, I don't want to like say this for every single individual, but think about what I was saying, even with athletes versus non-athletes. But even if you were not an athlete, think about your life from the age of 15 to even, let's say, the age of 35 in a 20-year period of time. At the age of 15, even if you're not playing a sport, you might be outside after school, like shooting hoops in your driveway or going on a bike ride or something like that, doing like all these things. And then you go to college, experience all of that, and then you get an 8 to 5 job where you're literally sitting at a desk, not moving all day. So right there, you're kind of changing your lifestyle. I don't know. I could go on and on about this topic, but the big takeaway with all of this is, does your metabolism slow down with age? The most recent research kind of says no between the ages of 20 to 60, but I would add the caveat into that as to what is your lifestyle like? If you're seeing your lifestyle becoming more sedentary as you get older, your metabolism probably is going to have an impact. And what is your medical history? What is your hormonal health? Like all of those layers come into it. But if you are able to sustain an active lifestyle, be mindful of your body composition, keep up with your hormonal health, stay overall healthy from a medical standpoint, obviously with what is in your control, you should not see a drastic change in your metabolism from the age of 20 to 60. And I say drastic because it is normal for your metabolism to change. And when Sophie and I talk about our experiences, we'll get into this. but it should not drastically change to the point where you should be gaining a lot of weight because of a slowed metabolism. After the age of 60, that is where the study started seeing there is a slight decline because of things like decrease in collagen production, which then can impact things like overall muscle mass and bone density, and the list goes on and on and on. Sophie, I'll bring you in a second to kind of go into that a little bit more. And then it started declining even more with ages 90 and older than that. So that's the gist with that. Want to go into anything else, Soph?
Well, I also am curious as to if and at what age any of the elder population had falls, because I hate to say it, but kind of as soon as you have your first fall when you're older, you become a little bit more scared and move a little bit less. But with that, I do have to say that 60 plus, like you can, maintain some stuff. You can still strength train. Definitely like 3 times a week is totally fine and doable. And even if you're not planning or want to gain any muscle, the muscle you currently have with those few days of strength training will still be working, just like mine is, like a day or two after trying to repair the muscle that you broke down.
Yeah. The last thing that I'll read word for word from the study's conclusion, just a takeaway that if you're like, okay, what do I do? I think this words it very, very, very well. It says adequate dietary protein, perhaps omega-3 fatty acids, and exercise training are the current mainstays of preventing metabolic abnormalities with aging. Correcting hormonal deficiencies can also result in positive metabolic changes as well. I think there's a lot more than just those things from a nutrition standpoint, but I think that's like a really short and sweet. If you want like a couple of takeaways, get enough protein, pay attention to your nutrition, strength train, and that can help from a metabolism standpoint as you get older. I want to throw this next question in because it kind of goes along with age and it kind of contradicts everything I just said. How does menopause impact your metabolism? And then someone else added on, is there anything you can do to help optimize your metabolism during menopause? So I'm going to answer the second question first because it's basically exactly what I just said. Being mindful of your nutrition, making sure you're getting enough protein in the day. If you don't know what that looks like, listen to our protein podcast. Make sure you are doing the right exercise for you and your body. The other thing I want to add on top of that, from more of not necessarily like a menopause standpoint, but I also think like if you are wanting to understand your metabolism in your body and how 2 and 2 are correlating together, and you are someone that's into data, stay on top of resting metabolic rate test and DEXA scans. You don't have to do them all the time, but like, okay, so say, let's take, for example, you're in your 40s right now. If you would get an RMR test and a DEXA scan once a year, you can do your own study on yourself and see kind of like how your life is impacting your metabolism and your body fat and your bone density and all of that type of stuff. Do you have to do that? Absolutely not. But if you are wanting to learn more, that's another way you can bring it in as well. So is there anything you can do? Yes, all of those things. But when we pull in when we pull in menopause, the short answer is when our estrogen levels are declining, that can potentially have an impact on muscle mass, which, as we all know, can then have an impact on your metabolic rate too. I think the hard part about menopause when we're relating it to age is, as we all know, women hit menopause at all different ages. And so that one I think is a little bit more hard to answer on a podcast because there's a lot of different layers to it. But the short answer is yes, menopause can impact your metabolism. But the longer answer is it kind of depends on when you're going through menopause and what you're doing before, during, and after that period. To what extent is your metabolism impacted? Our last question that we got that I'm dreading answering because this is such a hard question for me to answer for so many different reasons is timing of eating and metabolism. So there's lots of conflicting information right now out there on, okay, intermittent fasting, can that help speed up our metabolism versus no, like start with breakfast, it boosts our metabolism, eat 6 small meals a day. And I think where it gets confusing is when I was trying to look up the most recent research on this, I came across this myself and I was just like absolutely baffled with how a study was twisted. So I found more of like, it wasn't really a blog, it was an article, but it wasn't like a scientific article. It's basically an article that was summarizing a research article. And it was going on to talk about how intermittent fasting was helpful for your metabolism. But then when you actually read the study talked about how it was done on mice, and they found that eating burns more energy when the mice were restricted to eating a certain amount of times per day. So you might take that information as like, oh yeah, they're restricting the mice to only eat a certain amount of times per day. If I'm restricting when I eat, that's intermittent fasting. I'm fasting because I'm restricting the time I eat. And then you continue to read the study and you realize they're essentially restricting when the mice eats because they're sleeping, just like we all do. So that is not intermittent fasting. So I think that's what's like so frustrating with just in general with like research studies and articles and all of that type of stuff is like, if you're reading blogs or you're reading just like articles that aren't the actual research study, I am not saying they're incorrect. I'm just saying look into it a little bit more because either they might be summarizing it not to the full extent of what it's actually showing. There's also really conflicting evidence on this depending on who the study is done on, who runs the study. So how I would answer this question, just from like not a research side, but just like a professional side from my own personal and professional experience with clients, is before thinking about timing of eating in relation to your metabolism, you really need to be thinking about your timing of eating in relation to everything else: your hormone health, your lifestyle, your medical history, your activity level, all of that type of stuff. Because for the population that I work with, majority of people intermittent fasting, I do not recommend. I'm not a big fan of intermittent fasting because for a lot of the people that I work with, it doesn't work with their medical history. It doesn't work with their hormone health. It doesn't work with their lifestyle. But am I saying intermittent fasting doesn't work for anybody? I don't want to say that. Just for majority of the individuals that I work with, it's not the appropriate thing to be doing. Super, super simple example is if you're working out at 6 a.m. and you're intermittent fasting and not eating until 12 p.m., you're missing a whole chunk of time where you could be recovering from your workout with nutrition. The other thing too is like, okay, if someone struggles with getting low blood sugars and they're trying to intermittent fast and they have a low blood sugar in the morning because they haven't eaten. So I would say before you look at timing of eating from a metabolism standpoint. Look at it in the sense of like, are those things appropriate for all the other reasons that I said? But if I'm answering it from a metabolism standpoint, there is research on both sides. Intermittent fasting is a little bit harder because there's a lot of definitions to intermittent fasting. There's a lot of different methods to intermittent fasting. There's the fasting in terms of like different days where people will fast for like a whole day. There's intermittent fasting where it's like the 16-8 method or 8-16 method. Like there's a lot of different methods. So it's hard because there's not a lot of like intermittent fasting isn't one thing. So then when you're looking at the research, it's a lot of different things. Talking about the opposite side of like smaller meals per day, there's also, like I said, there's research on the intermittent fasting side and there's research on the small meals per day. And like both kind of have positive outcomes, saying like they both help with metabolism. And I think that's what's so hard as a professional is like, how can they both help with metabolism when they're two separate things? So that's why I was saying like, I really think it depends on the individual. But going into even more details, if we're talking about like, no matter if you're intermittent fasting or if you're eating 6 meals a day, there's still a period of time when you're eating and you're not eating. So I guess it also then dives into the question of like, okay, when you're not eating in the morning, is your metabolism slower? And then like, does it speed up throughout the day? I think that's more of like a lifestyle question. Because again, like if you're exercising midday, then like, yeah, you're going to be burning more calories. But the easier way of thinking about it is like, our metabolism is a whole system of it's working throughout the day. And even though technically, yes, it is associated with burning calories, just because you're burning more calories in a set amount of time doesn't mean you're speeding up, I'm like using air quotes, your metabolism in the long term. So a really good example that we just talked about off air was like the thermic effect of food. So when we eat, our body is digesting the food and it is burning calories in the process of doing that. So technically in that moment, yes, your body is burning more calories, but are you speeding up your overall metabolism from a day-to-day standpoint? Not necessarily. I know this can get like really complicated and complex to understand. So please, if you're listening to this and like you are totally confused, reach out to us and we can talk about it more one-on-one. But yes, the intermittent fasting and small meals per day, I really, really, really think that depends on the person. There's not super solid evidence on like either sides of the spectrum because you have to look at the research of, as I said, who it's done on, where it's done, who's funding the study, the details of the study of even like the intermittent fasting. Okay, are they talking about a 12-hour period? And, you know, I already went on down all that. So that kind of leads into another question that was talked about is then like under eating versus eating too much. Can that impact your metabolism? Before I dive into that, I'm going to pause. Sophie, any other like thoughts or questions on the timing of eating thing?
I was just going to add sample size into the thing to look for in studies as well, because I loved the age and metabolism one because the sample size is so huge. That is so great. It makes it more accurate to an extent. Yeah. Obviously, there's other things, but the bigger the sample size, the better.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, so I love research, obviously, like I'm an evidence-based girl, but on the other side of that, I also struggle with it because I think what's brought to the mainstream of research isn't always the full picture, and that really frustrates me. It's just like news, right? Like, why are some stories on the news and some aren't when they're like both important? So I feel like also I don't know, it's just it's hard.
I mean, any study, any researcher can get any result that they want. I'll say that. just about any result that you want. You can skew a
Totally.
study. It's called something bias, maybe research bias, where you do it a certain way so you get a certain result. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. And the last thing that I'll add on to that, which I kind of already said, but I'll just reiterate, is that's why I gave the recommendation of like doing your own study on yourself. I tell this to my clients all the time, and this is not about metabolism, this is just in general. You know your body the best. So even if I am recommending something, or your doctor is recommending something, or any professional is recommending something, and it doesn't feel right to you, let's talk about it. Because even if there's, I mean, as long as it's something safe, right? Like, I'm not gonna be like, yeah, that's totally fine to do if it's not safe. But in the scheme of things, a lot of things when it comes down to nutrition, it's like it could work for one person and not work for somebody else. And so you really have to understand your body and listen to your body. And I don't care if it's the best study in the world that tells me to do one thing. If it doesn't work with my lifestyle, it's probably still not the right thing to do. So the last thing before we wrap up is the under eating versus overeating. Under eating, so like if someone is chronically dieting, yes, that can, again, very potentially, it depends, have an impact on your metabolism. You might think the opposite then of like overeating, does that also impact? Not really, and I'll kind of explain why, but let's talk about under eating and dieting first. As we've talked about and this is just more of an analogy, but I'm going to throw out numbers out here. I'm not saying this is what anybody should be doing, but it's easier to understand it. So let's say, for example, we find out your body needs 2,000 calories a day for whatever your goal is. And let's say for a year, you decide, nope, I'm not going to listen to that. I'm only going to eat 500 calories a day. But your body actually needs 2,000 calories a day for organ function, for all of those things in the very beginning in part one that we had talked about. If over an extended period of time, you are not giving your body the fuel that it needs, your body is going to start to recognize that. Our bodies are very smart and very adaptive to what we're providing it and the lifestyle that we're living and the environment that we put ourselves in. And so instead of you being starving all the time and you not being able to sustain that lower calorie diet that you're giving yourself, your body is going to adapt to that by basically processing things slower, burning less calories so it can hold on to the energy that it needs to keep you alive. So if over time you were burning X amount of calories a day, but you're not giving that to your body, then over time, your metabolism can potentially start to slow down. The question that I get though is, okay, well, what about weight loss? Don't you need to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight? There's a safe way to be in a calorie deficit and an unsafe way. So the example that I just gave, okay, if you need 2,000 calories in a day to survive, or not even to survive, let's say you need 2,000 calories a day to maintain your weight, but you want to lose weight. Okay, well, there's a difference between eating 500 calories for weight loss or 1,500 calories for weight loss. We're talking a 500 calorie deficit to get to 1,500 or a 1,500 calorie deficit to get to 500 calories. So I'm not saying that you should not ever eat in a calorie deficit. It's more of saying that if you're in a chronically low calorie diet that's too low for your needs, then yes, over time, it can slow down your metabolism. I've also gotten the question following up on that, well, like, what if I don't eat in a day? Like, what if I'm really sick and I like can't eat because I can't keep down food, is my metabolism going to slow down? In conjunction to what I was just saying, probably not. It's the consistency of doing it. Just like if you skip a workout in the day, are you going to lose muscle? No, but if you continuously skip your workouts for months and months and months and months, then yes, you're probably going to see body composition change. That's the easiest way to think about it. If you're consistently and chronically essentially starving yourself or eating a really, really low calorie diet, over time, it could potentially change your metabolism.
Totally. And it has an effect on exercise as well.
Eating in a low calorie diet?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Because you don't have the fuel your body needs to get in a good workout.
I don't know if silly is the word, but it's just like you're kind of harming yourself from multiple ways.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So then someone might say, oh, well, if you eat more calories, does that mean you'll speed up your metabolism? Not quite, because our bodies, kind of like I was saying in the very beginning, if you go back to that analogy of the car and the gas tank, our bodies can only hold so much at one time. So it's just going to store those calories essentially in fat stores. And that's where weight gain comes in. Now, what I will say is sometimes we do see a change in your metabolic rate if you're eating more and gaining weight, because weight can impact your metabolism, but it kind of goes back to the body composition talk that we had. Where is that weight coming from? Muscle versus fat? How much weight is it? So on and so forth. So a lot of people think like, oh, if I lose weight or if I gain weight, my metabolism is going to do X, Y, Z. And it's not that linear. It's like not that easy to figure out, because it goes back into, okay, well, it's not just the weight on the scale. What is the body composition? What is the body fat breakdown? What is the muscle mass breakdown? What are your genetics? What is your hormone health? Everything that we had listed. Well, we just talked about a lot. So we're going to save our personal experiences for part 3.
Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully we answered all your questions on today's podcast. Catch you later.
Bye.